Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. My next guest has been a regular on whatever platform I've been on for the past 30 years, Mr. Speaker Newt Gingrich. He's back. Mr. Speaker, good to see you. I hear you got hurt last week. I hope you're feeling better.
Oh, I'm fine. I pulled my left shoulder. I didn't tear it. I just pulled it, but it's now better.
That's what I wanted to hear, because if you had torn your rotator cuff, I was going to tell you, don't do the surgery. Don't do it. It's a bad idea. I have in my hand Trump's Triumph. I want to tell people they want to read this book. I want to thank you. It's inscribed. Now, I get about 30 books a week because I'm a talk show host. You and Richard Nixon are the only two guys I know who actually go to the length of inscribing books for media people. When did you develop that discipline?
Probably from Richard Nixon. I don't know. It just seems to me, look, if you, as busy as you are, if you're going to take the time to look at my book, I kind of owe it to make it personal. And I try to write books that matter, and I'm always honored. You've had a huge impact on the country, and having a chance to be with you and talk about this is a great honor.
Well, there's so much to do. I'm going to focus in on two areas, politics and defense. And I want to start with defense, chapter 11, a system that works. When you told the story about George Marshall and the head of the cavalry, which I'd like you to tell again for the audience, I thought, holy smokes, I know World War II pretty well, and I have never heard about that before. Please let the audience know.
Well, George Catlett Marshall, who was the head of the Army, which at that time included the Air Force, was one of the real keys to how we did so well in World War II. And one of the things he did is he got rid of things that didn't work. And in the summer of 1940, after the Germans had gone through Poland and after they had gone through Holland, Belgium, and France, Marshall called in the commandant of cavalry and said, what have you done? What lessons have you learned from this blitzkrieg, this armored warfare? And the guy looked at him with great sincerity and said, well, we've been studying this very hard, and we have concluded that we need trucks that can carry the horses close to the forward edge of battle so that they're really fresh when we launch our cavalry charge. Marshall looked at him for a minute and said, that's been very, very helpful. He left. He called in his then Secretary Beadle Smith and said, I want you to retire him as of now, and I want you to close the office of Commandant of Cavalry as of 5 o'clock today, because it was clear the guy could not adjust to the modern world. And I use that as an example. You know, it's not how much money you spend on defense. It's how well you spend the money you're going to spend on defense. It's the ideas. It's the understanding of the modern world. And I have been an advocate of reform my entire career, going back to in 1981, helping found the Military Reform Caucus. So I'm very much for a strong defense. I worry very much about a large bureaucracy, which behaves like all large bureaucracies, slow, backward looking, and protecting its weakest elements.
I thought it was fascinating that you quoted Ike's farewell speech, but also that you stressed we need to focus on war winning and not war fighting. Now, I'm going to take an interim jump till I come to today. 45 years after Marshall discharges the head of cavalry, right before we get into the war, we have Goldwater Nunn and Goldwater Nichols. And you're a big part of Goldwater Nichols in 1986. Tell people what we did in 1986, because it's been another 40 years since then. And so we're ready for another dose of top to bottom reform.
You know, it was one of those weird American things. President Reagan decided to liberate the island of Grenada. We landed there and we discovered that the Army radios couldn't talk to the Navy radios. And an Army captain had to go to a payphone, use his credit card, call a friend in the Pentagon to call a friend in the Navy, etc. That becomes such a symbol of dysfunction that the Goldwater-Nichols bill, which required jointness, it required that all the services learn to work with each other. And I was one of the people, there were many people involved, but I was one of them. And what was interesting was every active duty four-star general and admiral, everyone opposed us. Ronald Reagan opposed us. The Secretary of Defense opposed us. But they couldn't answer this question: how can you claim a system works when a captain has to go to a payphone to use his credit card. And the Congress passed it, the president signed it. Every senior officer today, and I'm the longest serving teacher in the senior military, I've been teaching major generals since 1983. Every senior officer today will tell you that jointness is one of our greatest strengths, that we operate as a single team. None of that was true in 1986. And we need to have, frankly, a similar, very robust rethinking of our defense system today.
Well, let's start right there. I'm a civilian, but my family is Navy. We have people in the carrier community, people in the special forces community, people in the intel community. My carrier family members tell me we absolutely must have carriers. I think to myself, my gosh, I think they're targets now. What do you think about our orientation to big platforms, and do we need to move away from it?
I think that we need to rethink from the ground up the lessons we're learning, for example, in Ukraine. The Ukraine, using relatively inexpensive drones, drove the Russian Black Sea fleet into having to withdraw because they couldn't survive. I have yet to see, the Chinese have an enormous number of merchant ships. You could put 20, 30, 40 drones on every merchant ship. They're the equivalent of an aircraft carrier. Now, you would take huge casualties, you'd lose a lot of ships, but Admiral Nelson, who was the key to winning in Trafalgar, the most famous British admiral in history, said one time, numbers annihilate. And I think that we probably should have built our last aircraft carrier, and we should be thinking about totally new methods of warfare, totally new approaches. And frankly, we ought to have some people out there right now looking at the battlefield of 2040 and 2050 and imagining real-time robotics, artificial intelligence, all the things that are coming down the road, all the assets in space, and recognize these are not going to be survival. These old systems aren't going to survive. One of the things I've been thinking about writing, the French battled the English 3 times in about a century at Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt. All 3 times, the French heavy cavalry was wiped out.
I thought you missed. You wrote that chapter so elegantly, weaving in George Catlin Marshall, Agincourt, and modern transformation of the military. Quick exit question to the break, Mr. Speaker. Would you think the president ought to reprogram money and just give big dollops to people like Palantir and Anduril to develop new death rays or whatever we need for the next century?
I think we should, and also to small companies. Look, a lot of the great breakthroughs are, the companies you just described weren't very big 20 years ago. So we ought to be just doling money out to lots of wildcatters, have people out there entrepreneurially trying to succeed, and then test them on the battlefield. Take them out to White Sands, New Mexico, or out somewhere in Nevada. Do they work or not work? If they work, buy them, even if the company doesn't have any lobbyists. Go ahead and buy it just because it works.
I'm going to be right back with Speaker Gingrich. I'm going to talk to him during the break about the Vatican. That's not in Trump's triumph, but if you get Trump's triumph, you will get a comprehensive overview of where he has been, where he is going, and what needs to be done. But I'm going to do a little Catholic talk with the Speaker during the break, which you're going to have to listen to on YouTube if you want to hear what he thinks about Pope Leo. Stay tuned. I am back with Speaker Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, you're married to the wonderful Ambassador Gingrich. She was our ambassador to the Vatican in Trump's first term, which meant she had to deal with Pope Francis. You weren't there when Leo walked out, or Pope Bob. But you know the Vatican pretty well. How surprised were you? What do you expect out of the Vatican now?
I was very surprised. Callista was not as surprised.
Really?
We had just finished her hearing to become the ambassador to Switzerland. And so we went to a lunch to celebrate having gotten through the hearing. And we were standing there at Cafe Milano with our good friend Franco Nuscesi, who's very close to the church. And all of a sudden there's white smoke. And white smoke, of course, means that the conclave has picked a pope. And Callista says, I'm not going to be shocked if it is in fact who became Pope Leo. He had been in Peru a long time. I think the Latin Americans all thought he was a Latin American pope. Of course, he's a White Sox fan. I'll let other people decide how good or bad that is. He's clearly American, and he's clearly exactly what the church needs right now: common sense, practical, good sense of humor, trying to consolidate and calm the church down. Pope Francis was exactly what he intended to be. When you pick St. Francis of Assisi as the person whose name you're choosing, you're sending a signal about how bold you're going to be and how disruptive you're going to be. And he was. On the other hand, if you take Pope Leo the 13th, who's the great modernizer of the church in the 1890s, and who really creates the base of all social doctrine for the church, and now you pick his name as Pope Leo the 14th, you're sending a signal of concern for the poor, but in a very methodical, thoughtful way that, after all, over a century ago, laid the basis for all modern Catholic thinking about the modern world and the role of the poor and the world of the working poor. So I think he's probably going to be a remarkably effective pope. I noted that he's gone to Castel Gandolfo to spend a couple of weeks supposedly vacationing. And then they said, oh, by the way, while he's down there, he's writing an encyclical, which I guess if you're a pope, that's your idea of time off and relaxing.
Well, I'm a cradle Catholic. I'm very optimistic because I think an American of my age is going to have a better sense of America and how not to distance the church from America. And I think Francis, whether he intended to or not, created a great chasm, and a chasm that we cannot endure. We're coming right back on the air to talk more about this book, Trump's Triumph, with Speaker Gingrich. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, America. Until President Trump won in 2016, the single greatest surprise in American political history was Newt Gingrich's win in 1994 when the House went from Democrat to Republican control. I was anchoring for KCET, a PBS affiliate, no longer publicly funded by the end of the weekend, I hope, when Chris Cox walked in and said, if anyone told you they saw this coming, they're lying. Mr. Speaker, when you write in Trump's Triumph about how to do politics coming up in the next cycle, you write a few things I want to call to people's attention. One, it is not inevitable that Republicans lose. Now, the title chart suggests that they would. Why do you think it's not inevitable?
Well, because I think, first of all, if you look at Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1934, where they gained seats because they're in the middle of a revolution. President Trump represents a profound, fundamental change in Washington, and it's a change most Americans want. And my hunch is that by next summer, between the bill they just signed, the work he's doing on tariffs, a number of other steps about investments, things like the project in Philadelphia or in Pittsburgh, where they announced $50 billion in additional investments. All of that, I think, by the summer of 2026 is going to lead to the Trump boom. And the choice that fall is going to be between a Marxist socialist party with weird social ideas, led by people like Mondami and AOC, and a Republican Party committed to fixing Washington, growing an American economy, and protecting American interests. I think in that case, we could pick up seats in the House and the Senate on a scale nobody today could imagine.
So you write in Trump's Triumph, we need a positive national mood. Trump can do this if he's mixing up with the media. The grandfather clock in Rubio, that was so perfect in terms of creating national mood. But his numbers right now don't suggest that the country's very happy. Are the numbers wrong? Because I kind of feel like we're on the right path and we're moving fast.
Well, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, for the first time in the history of the Rasmussen poll, 50% of the country said we're on the right track. But look, this is a work in progress. I always tell people, you have to think of it as a motion picture, not a Polaroid snapshot. We're in the middle of turmoil. We're in the middle of very deep, dramatic change. We're in the middle of trying to solve the Middle East and to solve Ukraine. There are a lot of things going on. But if you watch, and this just happened in the last 24 hours, they passed a rescission bill, which would have been impossible under any president except Trump. They're going to come back with more. They're going to cut spending. They're going to move towards a balanced budget. They're going to have a better economy. But these are big changes. They don't. And I think the question is not how well is he going to do this summer. The question is, by the time we get to August, September of 2026, people are going to say one of two things. It's working, in which case they're going to elect Republicans, or it's not working, in which case they might elect Mondami Marxists and socialists. Now, I think the Democrats are making it harder for them to make a comeback because, frankly, they're so addicted to truly weird ideas. And I think that all makes it, people look at that stuff and they think, you're not us. You don't represent America.
Page 38 to 39, you just list the number of oddball ideas that Democrats have and how badly they poll. I would think every candidate and every campaign consultant should read that. But I quoted you yesterday to former and I hope future Senator Scott Brown when I told him you wrote in Trump's Triumph, $1 raised in 2025 is worth $5 raised in 2026. And I'm going to repeat that to every candidate who comes on the program for the next year and a half. Why is $1 raised in 2025 5 times as valuable as one raised in 2026?
Because the closer you get to the election, the more people interpret things as politics. The earlier you get your message out, the more likely they are to believe that it's real, the more likely they are to accept it without partisan bias. And the trick here, and this is what Roosevelt was Reagan was brilliant, Trump, frankly, is pretty darn brilliant. The trick is to shape the environment so it's easier to believe your side and harder to believe their side. And you shape the environment early. One of my big projects now is to reestablish the authenticity of a balanced budget because it changes all the equations if the country decides we're really going to balance the budget. And you suddenly have a radically better long-term economic outlook. That has all sorts of psychological effects. Well, the time to establish that is 25, not September and October of 26.
Okay, one last question. I got to go into the break and keep you for 2 more minutes because it's so important. I want the audience to understand the speaker was the first one ever to turn tables on the national media in a debate in 2012 with John King, and he is recognized for the first time. I've always believed this, but something about Trump's genius and the rallies that I just want to get on the record with him for 2 minutes during the break. So go listen to the full interview over at YouTube. Trump's Triumph by Newt Gingrich, must-have book. Go and get it. I'll be right back, America. A quick exit with Mr. Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House of Representatives. In his brand new book, Trump's Triumph, on page 33, he writes, part of Trump's genius is his ability to use huge rally as focus groups. I've always thought of them as a feedback loop. Can you expand on that? Because I do believe that is the secret sauce.
Look, I think he, very much like Abraham Lincoln or FDR, he's able to watch the reaction of the audience, and he's able to intuit what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes the audience suddenly shows up with something he never thought about, in which case he listens to him and he decides he's going to do what they're telling him to do. I mean, Lincoln once said, with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without public sentiment, nothing can succeed. Donald J. Trump understands that. He is, I think, a brilliant leader of public opinion. He's also a brilliant follower of public opinion.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thank you again for Trump's Triumph. I think it's book 45. Am I right about that? Book number 45?
I think so. That's about right. That's close enough.
Well, congratulations. Safe travels to Switzerland. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you. Take care.